2024 ended up being a really fantastic year for games, despite some very visible whinging from certain corners of the gaming public, especially those that are laser focused on only playing the most bombastic and expensive titles. The AAA market is slowing down a good bit, sure, but not only were there still plenty of those sorts of games, in my opinion, and great ones at that, but there being a tiny bit fewer of those just makes more room for exciting, new, smaller titles to poke their heads up and get more exposure. No matter what kind of games you're into, there was something in 2024 for you. And so I do very much expect to see a pretty huge variety in people's top 10 lists this year, especially in the lower half. We even got to end the year with some great surprises that forced me to really spend some time with some games that I hadn't expected to, in order to feel like I was really ready to make this list. But now I'm done, so without any further delay, I'm happy to present my top 10 games of 2024. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth finds itself at the bottom of this list for the same reason a lot of games that end up here do. I really loved it for a lot of reasons, but I also have some pretty huge reservations that keep me from placing it any higher. When it comes to this game in particular, I have big issues with how the ending was handled with such astounding indecisiveness, something I don't want to get into too much here because this game is incredibly long and a lot of people probably haven't finished it, so I would feel bad spoiling it. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore how much fun I had for almost the entire rest of the time I was playing the game. There is a ton of fantastic character work, and you get to know characters deeply that were incredibly one-dimensional in the original. Even when suffering through some wildly variable minigames that go from absolutely incredible, like Queen's Blood, to completely abysmal, like the sit-up contests, I was still having a ton of fun. In particular, I spent so much time in the Gold Saucer just wrapping up every single thing that was there, to the point that I was very frustrated by a bug that prevented me from finishing it all up. I made an effort to seek out every little nook and cranny of Rebirth's world, trying to check off just about every box on the map and in the world, and all in all, I had a great time doing so. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown isn't the best Metroidvania to come out this year, we'll get to that one later, but it's still an absolutely fantastic one. There are constantly new Metroidvanias coming out of the indie space, and some of them end up being the best of all time. But it is absolutely fantastic to see a Metroidvania with a larger kind of mid-budget coming out of a company that isn't Nintendo. And they absolutely nailed it here with the perfect balance of discovery, exploration, and a fantastic and enormously fun combat system that makes the game's bosses an absolute joy to take on, as well as the normal enemies that are scattered around the world. This is the point at which I generally say I'm really looking forward to seeing how the team behind this game improved on it for a sequel, so it is incredibly unfortunate that this game did not meet Ubisoft's expectations, and the team has been disbanded. So instead, I hope that other teams can learn some of the lessons presented by this game instead. I look forward to the evolution of the genre that may come out of that, and I also continue to hope against hope that more bigger publishers adopt these sort of smaller mid-budget projects, which have all but died out. Dragon's Dogma 2 is a sequel that I don't think anyone would have believed we would ever actually get. The original was an incredibly niche game that tried a bunch of truly amazing and really weird things to varying degrees of success, and While it found a lot of respect in certain corners of the internet, it certainly didn't find success in the wider market. The sequel did get more attention from a lot of people, but it still seemed to only actually appeal to that same limited market that the original did. The feeling of exploration in Dragon's Dogma 2 is absolutely fantastic, and the sheer possibilities of what you're able to do in this game are incredible, despite its main story failing completely at basically every turn. I loved just living in this game's world and exploring everything that it had to offer, which also helped a lot to offset its highly limited fast travel system, something that it inherits from the original game. It also certainly helped that I was able to brute force my way past any performance issues, which were an absolute killer for a lot of people who gave this game a try, especially on consoles. What really took this game from a good one, a well-made successor to the first, to being one of my favorite games of this year, though, was the late title card, 35 hours in, and what that represented about how the game was changing at that point. That specific moment is easily my favorite singular moment in games all year, and one I wish more people could experience if it weren't for all of the roadblocks that the game throws in their way. Tactical Breach Wizards has a fantastic lineage. Having played both of the developers' previous games, Gunpoint and Heat Signature, I knew to expect a lot of throwing people out of windows, but what I honestly had no reason to expect was a truly great game in the vein of XCOM and Into the Breach, and more often than not, just about on the same level as those games. The tactics gameplay itself is extremely well done, and while it's pretty easy at its base level, the challenges littered throughout allow you to basically tweak the difficulty of the game at will, depending on how hard or easy you want things to be, along with a very welcome skill progression layer that allows you to customize each and every character to do exactly what you need from them. Speaking of those characters, what this game has that so many other tactics games don't is a set of really likable and incredibly well-written characters. The story they're involved in certainly isn't the best part of the proceedings, but it holds its own and does its job, which is to serve as a vehicle for some really well-done and witty writing. While other tactics games may do specific parts better, Tactical Breach Wizards is perhaps the best total package I've ever played in the genre. Balatro is a combination of ideas that don't necessarily seem like they'll work. At its core, it's a card game with poker mechanics, and it's a roguelite. Both things that are generally not well known for being particularly welcome to newcomers, having their own worlds, their own insular communities. But not only does Balatro bring those two worlds together seamlessly, but it uses its different sections as an on-ramp. Don't understand roguelikes? That's fine. If you understand poker, you can get on there. And the opposite is also true if you understand roguelikes, but not poker. But it also manages to quickly introduce everything it is to new players with almost no background. Someone in that category will have to quickly figure out how poker hands work, but it is truly incredible how welcoming this game is. And once you're into it, you are fully into it in a borderline dangerous way. Of all the games I played this year, Balatro was certainly the most addictive and the hardest to put down. Just one more game was a real problem here, one that was made even worse when it eventually came out on mobile, meaning I didn't even need my Steam Deck to play it anymore. The spell eventually broke for me, as with any of these games, and I did eventually feel like I had solved the game and was able to move on to other things, but I still find myself going back on my phone every now and again, and I still have a great time whenever I do so. Nine Souls is hands down the best Metroidvania I've played this year. It does a great job with the traditional things I've come to expect from the genre. Great exploration with lots of stuff to find, along with excellent new abilities that allow you to return to areas you've already been to in order to discover even more stuff. But what's incredibly rare in the genre, and is the most shockingly good thing about Nine Souls, though perhaps it shouldn't have been given Red Candle's pedigree, is its plot and characters, which both manage to be absolutely incredible. The characters in particular are really well fleshed out, and I grew very emotional over some of them by the time things were wrapping up. The combat is also absolutely excellent. Appropriately tough, parry-centric combat that feels very much like the Bloodborne formula translated into a 2D format. The best thing, though, is that if you're enjoying the game mostly for the exploration or for the excellent story, the combat is very adjustable if you put it into story mode. And this is one of the few of these sorts of Souls-like games that I'd absolutely recommend doing that with just to see Nine Souls through to the end. Because it's worth it just to see what happens to these fantastically fleshed out characters. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle was this year's biggest surprise for me. The promotion that was being done leading up to this game coming out had me deeply dismissive of it, so I was kind of shocked when it finally released and turned out to be one of my favorite games of this year. In retrospect, it shouldn't have been such a huge surprise. After all, I've loved what Machine Games has done in the past with the Wolfenstein games, and what some of the core people in that studio did back in the day at Starbreeze. But there's definitely very much a part of me that's automatically concerned about licensed titles that lean on an existing property. And in that way, it's appropriate that the game is so reminiscent of the Chronicles of Riddick, another game that shone brightly despite being a licensed game. More specifically, this game feels a lot like Riddick crossed with Dishonored, mixed in with smaller sprinklings of Hitman and the latter-day Tomb Raider games. All coming together along with an extremely fun-to-explore series of semi-open world areas to make the perfect mix of exploration, combat, and puzzle solving that make this feel so much like the perfect Indiana Jones game. And easily the best Indiana Jones story since The Last Crusade. The way that the cutscenes, with their excellent voice and face acting, make it feel exactly like an Indiana Jones movie should, completely nailing the sense of humor, pacing, and over-the-top storytelling, ties the whole thing together in an absolutely joyous way. Lorelei and the Laser Eyes is, at its heart, a giant puzzle box. The mansion that you enter at the start of the game is its very own fantastic layered puzzle with a layered plot mystery to match. A ton of the puzzles will absolutely stand on their own individually, but they also come together slowly over the course of the game to let you solve larger meta puzzles that are scattered all throughout. Lorelei and the Laser Eyes quickly became one of my favorite puzzle games ever, and had me struggling over solutions extensively at times. But when I finally reached those solutions, I never once felt like the game had cheated me out of anything. Every one of them made sense in a way that I felt like I should have always been able to figure out. I usually would not talk about endings, but I think it's really important here to what makes this game so great, and I'll try to talk as vaguely as possible. You see, the ending of Lorelei is fascinating in how it twists things around, so that instead of testing your puzzling prowess, it presents itself as a puzzle, but it's really testing your comprehension of the game's plot. If you've been paying attention, you'll have no trouble getting the answers to these final questions, but it's an absolutely fantastic way of stitching up a convoluted plot at the end of a long game where you've been immersed in a ton of complex puzzles. And that element also points to another big part of why I loved this game so much, and that is just simply vibes. Between the excellent art style and the great writing, it comes across as something truly special the entire time you're playing it. And that feeling has carried through here to the end of the year. Astrobot is one of the very few big console exclusives that came out this year, and it's one that's incredibly refreshing. Sony has very much become known for big, story-driven, mature titles these days, and more specifically, kind of the same handful of franchises a few times each generation. And that's what makes Astrobot such an exciting throwback to the days where Sony was publishing some fantastically unique titles back on the PS1 and PS2. Back in the year the PS5 launched, 2020, I put the pack-in, Astro's Playroom, at the bottom of my list, down at a strong number 8. Pretty respectable for a game that was mostly meant as a tech demo for a new console. But today, I'm putting this full-priced follow-up here at number 2. Astrobot is the culmination of everything that Team Asobi has been doing over the last 10 years or so, since the PS4 came out. And with this entry in the Astro canon, they've managed to create a platformer on par with some of the best ones ever made mechanically. It has some incredibly inventive mechanics, not a single one of which wears out its welcome. And it does this while also, simultaneously, after decades of Sony trying on and off, finally give them a true mascot platformer, and also giving the platform itself as a whole a mascot that actually works for everyone. If you've ever enjoyed a platformer and have any nostalgia at all for the world of Sony video games, I think you'll adore Astrobot, just as I have. Metaphor ReFantazio, over its runtime, managed to find its way to being my favorite of the games to come out of the Persona team over at Atlus, known as P Studio since 2012, and it is no small feat to beat out Persona 3 and 4 for me personally. Getting the formula outside the usual Japanese high school setting has done wonders for me here with this game. Everything happening in a single unified world makes much more difference than you'd think, and makes what you're doing feel all that much more impactful. In fact, despite its fantasy setting, this game feels like the most grounded one that's ever come out of this group, in a way that makes it so much more enjoyable, with an absolutely fantastic core plot with tons of fun twists and turns. It also continues to nail what the Persona series almost always has, with great characters and so many great separate stories to tell outside of the main one. It also keeps the Persona formula mostly intact, with the ability to level up your bonds with people in the world and a calendar that dictates the limited things you can do each day. But it also makes smart, small improvements to the system that meant I never really felt like I needed to go for the optimal choices when it came to spending my time leveling up bonds or doing side quests. And after the first few hours of the game, I found myself hardly ever checking what people online were doing. Yet, I had no issues maxing out every bond and completing every side quest by the time all was said and done. The dungeon crawling is also improved a good bit by the fact that you can now simply kill enemies that are far enough below you in terms of level, instead of entering into the usual turn-based battles, which makes that part of the grind so much more tolerable. Put together, all of its improvements make Metaphor a big step forward for the Persona formula, one that I already loved, and for JRPGs in general. It absolutely demonstrates that this studio not only still has it when it comes to innovating in the space, but also still has it when it comes to making absolutely incredible games.